I was joking with some friends the other that feast was last week, and it includes my two patrons, and I was joking with some people. Of all the places James and John are mentioned, at least in the Gospels, I think that's the only story where they don't say or do anything dumb, and it's because Peter does it for them. But I think all the other places they come up, they're sticking their foot in their mouth just about every time, which is why I mean, they're the names I was born with, but it's why I kept it. I was like, well, they learn to go from constantly sticking their foot in their mouth and being the son of thunder to being a saint. So that's pretty much my inclination anyway. So I was like, why do I need it? Why do I need a new patron? This is my path.
It's amazing, the sons of thunder, right? But I mean, this thunder's the storminess, and yet where are they? Where the light shines. Even the cloud is a bright cloud, right? So it's you see what is it? It's about the dark clouds that are dissipating from their hearts, because the sun is the only way that they're able to see the sun shining in front of them is that the sun is shining from within them. Right? They were transfigured. And we're getting ahead of ourselves, but this is all amazing.
Yes. Yes, it is. You were talking earlier about the chaos in the Old Testament and how difficult it is with how much of the world has been Christianized, and we see that receding a little bit in our own culture now. But we can still, I think, struggle to appreciate the difference between before and after. I remember when I was young, there was a particular preacher who would always say, at some point, God is going to owe Sodom and Gomorrah an apology. And I remember thinking about that for a while. I was like, well, that's impossible, which means it had to have been so much worse than we can really get our head around to recognize, like, no, this was necessary. And then everything through Joshua, the stuff that people like to say is genocide. It's like, well, they were cannibalistic, like, they're not really people, that part of the story. They're doing things that are so bestial that it's not really genocide. And if you really pay attention to who the groups are and what they do, it's like, yeah, they're giants, and they're engaging in all kinds of horrific religious practices that involve human sacrifice and all kinds of other horrible things. Like, they had to go, and they've been doing it for centuries and centuries. There's points early on where God's like, well, their cup's not full yet, but their day's coming. It just goes on and on and on.
It's true. And we don't know, when we're dealing with all of the different human cultures there, we forget, right, that God has been with them, their whole story. It's not just like God shows up. God's everywhere. And he knows every one of them, right? More than they know themselves. A human person is a mystery, and that mystery is unknowable even for us. And it's us we're talking about, right? I don't know myself entirely. God knows me entirely. And we don't know how long and how deeply God has been calling these people to repentance, how God has been dealing with it, right? We don't know any of that. And one of the beautiful things about Orthodoxy is we know that. We recognize we don't know, that in that whole story, we know this much, right? And as Americans, it doesn't start with Americans. We'll blame the Germans eventually, but as Americans, we just tend to think that we know the whole situation and that we somehow can judge it based on whether 19th century standards or 21st century standards or whatever. And we don't know. There's so much we don't know. And what we're given is really a very small part of the story. And that part of the story is there for our salvation. And there's plenty there for our salvation.
It's amazing to me too, to go back to what you were highlighting about the darkening of the nous, the darkening of our ability to see the noetic world. This is not a challenge that only Christianity talks about, or only the Old Testament talks about. I mean, there are so many philosophies and religions around the world that talk about the third eye or the inner eye. There are so many practices about becoming enlightened in some sense, and how they go about it is not necessarily what we would recommend. but they recognize the problem. They realize there's this issue that there's this entire aspect of creation that we're supposed to interact with that we're not interacting with. So this is not particular to us. This is, as we said last week with stillness, there are many cultures that recognize the problem of still, how can I be still? This is a similar thing where there are many cultures that recognize this problem that we can't really see.
Right. And we're going to talk about some of these, right? I mean, this is what it's about. But, first of all, let's look at this. We talked about the diagnosis. And then when we really go through diagnosis, we have the therapy, right? And that's where we're really going to get into this. But if we want, we can really jump ahead and talk about, like, what does it mean to see? Where are we going? Right? That's really the question.